Hello everybody, Jonathan here from M Games, and in this video we're going to be setting up the enemy. The enemies will be able to move down the screen, we'll also set the animation for them, and give them score. So open up the Godot editor and let's get started. So a quick recap of the last episode. If I play the game, we can press enter, and we can move the characters around, they'll collide with the walls, and the player can now shoot, and the lasers will collide with the enemy. So let's start off by giving the enemy some health. We're going to open up the scene, level 1. And now we're going to click on our enemy. We'll give it a script, no comments. Open up to the scripts folder. Right click, new folder, enemies. And then we'll just say enemy 01. And create. And the first thing we're going to do is we are going to create the health variable. Export integer var health equals 1. So this is giving the enemy a health variable that you can change from the node. So if I duplicate this with Control D and then move it over, we can give this one a health variable of 2, and then our laser should be able to affect it. There's one thing I noticed in the video that I left out, which I mentioned, but I didn't quite go into it. We are going to open up the laser script, and we're going to go down to where it has func entered, and area.isInGroupEnemy. We are going to give this area.getParent.getHealth. And now, if I run this level, and if I fire one bullet, or one laser, it will remove the enemy. If I fire 2, it will remove the enemy. In order to get the enemy to move down the screen, there's a few things we're going to have to do. First off, I don't want these enemies to be in the main screen, or the main level tree. So right click on level, add child node, node 2D, change this to enemies. Now we're going to move our enemies into this node. So the basic goal of this is we want the main parent to move instead of getting all the enemies to move individually. So the idea is this enemies node is going to move all of them, and then whenever one of these enemies collides with the border, we're going to move down a certain ways, and then we're going to continue to move over to the left, and move down a bit, and then move over to the right, continuously. So let's reset the position on the enemies. And another thing I'm going to do is right click on enemy, save branch as scene, go to assets, instances, right click, new folder, enemies, and then we'll rename this enemy to enemy 01. Save. And now I'm going to remove that second enemy, and then we'll just duplicate this, and we can move that over, do the same thing, give it a health variable of 2. We're going to open up the enemy scene. I want to change the sprite from the default Godot logo, as well as move the enemy to the 00 of the scene tree. So select the enemy, go to transform, and reset. Now, I have the assets, sprites, enemies, alien 01, alien 01 sprite already. I'm just going to drag that over to our sprite. You'll notice that the enemy is too small because we had it scaled. So we'll reset the scale, select our collision shape, and then we'll just scale that down to match. And we'll just move that up. And there we go. We now have our basic enemy set up. We go back to the level 1. We'll move that enemy down here. And if we playtest the game, we have our aliens. Fire a laser, and they work as expected. So let's get them moving. In order to do that, we're going to add a script to the enemies node. Go over here, new script, no comments. Go to scripts and enemies. And this will be enemy controller. Go with the capital here. And open. And create. So the first thing we're going to do is set up our enum variables. And this is going to be move down, move left, and move right. And then we can give our state, so onReady state equals, I like to have it move to the right. Then we can give some variables for the speed. So we have options here, because on one hand we could have it to where the enemies have a horizontal speed, and then we also have a vertical speed, or we can just have it to where it's one speed that it constantly moves at that certain rate. But I'm going to separate them here just to give us some options. So horizontal speed equals 18, and var v speed, so vertical speed, equals 14. And the direction that we're going to take is going to be right. All capital. And we have a down timer. So the down timer is just a check to see if the enemy can move down. It only happens whenever the enemy collides with one of the borders, and then we'll activate a timer, and then once that timer is completed, we will move the enemy to the left or to the right. You'll see here in just a moment. Also, we're going to need another variable. This one is going to be var v distance equals 4. So this is going to be the vertical distance that we travel before moving left or right again. So next, create an onReady var next pose equals global position dot y plus the v distance. So what that is basically doing is just getting the next position that we are going to move down to. Let's access that here and process delta. Let's match the states first. Move right, move left, and then move down. So in move right, we're going to access the global position dot x plus equals the h speed times delta. We'll copy this line and move it over to the left. We'll go with minus equals. So for the move down, we're going to access a few things here. First off, if down timer is greater than 0, down timer minus equals 0.1. And else, if the timer is greater than 0, check if the global position .y is greater than next pose Then we're going to change our state to move down. Also, we're going to add to our global position .y plus equals v speed times delta. Else next position equals, and what we can do is just copy this and we can just paste this down here, global position.y plus vertical distance. And then we're going to access a move down function. Notice that move down is a function that's not created yet, so let's create that now. Func move down. If direction equals left, state equals move left. We're going to copy this and then paste, and if direction equals right, move right. Then we're going to create another function. This one our enemy is going to access. So func set state. And then we'll add the optional variable state equals state. And that is all we need for our enemy controller. We can now go over to the enemy script, create an enum to match the enum variable in the enemy controller. So you scroll up to the top, you can technically just copy that and paste. We'll have move down, move left, and move right. Because this is accessing or going to change the enemy controller, we don't need to have the onReady state, because that's already being set. So in our ready, we're going to access the area 2D collision. So get node, area 2D, .connect, area entered, self, colliding. We can copy that and create func colliding area. And inside here, we're going to check if area dot is in group. This one is going to be left. So we're going to check get parent dot set state, and this one is going to be move down. Then get parent dot direction equals right, and get parent dot down timer equals 0.2. And I'm going to copy this. Then this will be if right move down left. There we go. And then we're going to have another if area dot is in group. This one is going to be bottom, or let's just pass player. So for this, we're just going to go to the main menu script and go down to the change scene function, copy the get tree change scene to, and then we'll paste it into the area that is in group player or bottom. Then we can just erase all this, change this to menus, and then we'll change this to game over. And we can test that real quick by going to the scene 2D view. We're going to copy border right, so Control D, then we'll move it over to the center, we'll move it down. Then we're going to rename this to bottom. Select our collision shape 2D. We'll create a new rectangle shape 2D. And then what we can do is just move that out. There we go. Yeah, it's fine, it'll be right there. Then we can just move this down to the bottom of the screen and go into node groups and change right to bottom. And in the inspector, you can click on collision and make sure it's on layer 1. Everything's good. And what I was going to do was just move it up to where it's colliding with the enemy, and then you can play the scene, and it'll go to game over. Move down a bit, play the scene, and it'll play. Oh, and you'll notice that the enemies are moving. And they'll bounce left and right. Let's just undo a few times. Go back to the enemy script. Okay, technically we're done with the enemy script. We can go into the enemy controller script. Okay, what needs to happen is an enemy controller. We need to, instead of doing greater than, we do less than next position. And in order to test that, we can move this enemy over to the left and move this enemy over to the right. And then we can play. And the enemy will collide and move. Again, I mean, you can move that over and the enemy will keep going. Oh yeah, we can also shoot them. So, ta-da! So the next thing we're going to do is set up our score. So let's go back to the enemy script. Go over here to the top, export int. Change this to score. And the next thing we also need to do is go over to our menu. Whenever we press the start button, we're going to want to change the globals.score to 0. So we have our score and we have our high score. Now, one thing I noticed was that we have our high score label. We're setting that, but we're not setting our score label. So let's copy this, paste it below, change this to score, and change this over to score label. We're going to get our high score label, and we're going to get our score label. So currently we have a score and we have a high score, but technically nothing is changing the high score. So what we'll do is go above this and type in if globals.score is greater than globals.highscore, globals.highscore equals globals.score. So this technically won't work because we need to go back to the laser script. And down here where we have the health, we're going to check if area.get parent dot has or dot get score then globals dot score plus equals copy area dot get parent dot get score. Now if we play test the game, I can press escape and score equals 1 and high score equals 1. Enter Press escape, score equals 0, high score equals 1. Press enter again. Press escape, score equals 2, high score equals 2. So the next step, we're going to animate our enemy. Let's go back to the enemy script. And then we're going to give it a few variables. This time we're going to export array texture var character sprite list. I'm going to copy this again. This will be explosion sprite list. So now if we select our enemy, you'll notice that we have character sprite list and explosion sprite list. And you can click on one, and then you can add more sprites. And so on and so forth. So now, let's go back to the script, and we're going to add a few more variables. This is going to be var current sprite equals 0, var current FPS equals 0, var FPS delay equals 5, and var FPS rate equals 0.1. So everything in the list kind of starts at, you have a list like this, and then you have 0, 1, 2, and so forth. So what we're doing is we're going to get the current sprite, which will be 0, 1, 2, etc. And the current FPS is basically every time we count down from a delay of 5, we're going to add this to 1. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and then 1, and then again and again, based on this rate. So let's go down here to a new function, func process. Then let's create another function. This one will be func animate. And then we're going to set up our variables here, which will be sprite. And back in our process function, we're going to access that with animate. And then we're going to set this to character sprite list. Now, let's change our animation. If current FPS is greater than 0, current FPS minus equals FPS rate. Else, current FPS equals FPS delay. If current sprite is less than sprite dot size minus 1, current sprite plus equals 1. Else, current sprite equals 0. Then down below here, if sprite dot size doesn't equal 0, texture, so we're changing the sprite's texture now, equals sprite current sprite. Now let's go back to the enemy scene, go back to the 2D view, and we will select our enemy, go to the character sprite list, and we're going to add 2 textures to this list. Load, alien, we're going to go with alien 1, and alien frame 2. Now, if we go back and playtest this, the enemies are animating. And there are two ways that we can speed this up. Go back to the enemy script, and you can change the FPS rate to something faster, or you can change the delay to something lower. Playtest that. There we go. So instead of removing the enemy right away, I want to swap the character sprite list to the explosion sprite list, which I can add right now. Not here. Go back to the enemy main scene, change the explosion sprite list. I have 3 sprites, but for some reason when I swap it, it kind of jumps over the 0 and moves over to 1, 2, 3. So I'm just going to click over here, click on load, go to assets, sprites, effects, explosion 01, and explosion 01 F1. So frame 1. Another thing that I can do is just go over here, and instead of doing all these manually, I can drag and drop, and this will be a little bit faster. So now that we have our character sprite list and our explosion sprite list, we're going to check if the enemy is still alive, and also remove the Q free from the laser. So go over here to laser, and inside the laser script, instead of area.getParent.QFree, we are going to comment that out. So now the enemy won't be removed. Then we go back to the enemy 01 script, go full screen, scroll all the way to the top, and we're going to add 2 more variables. These ones are going to be var alive equals true, and var temp death state equals false. Now one thing I forgot to do was whenever the enemies spawn in, they all play the same animation frame, so it kind of looks a little bland having multiple enemies on screen at the same time. I can show you this right here. And if I play this, all the enemies are playing the same animation. It just looks bland. So what I'm going to do is go to the enemy script and go full screen. In the ready, we're going to randomize. So the next thing we want to do is we want to randomize this, but we only want to do it between a random range because we have our sprite list, which starts at 0 and ends at an infinite amount technically. So what we're going to do is set our current frame, our current sprite, equals, and we're going to round this number, because if you do a rand range, and then you have 0 and 1, for some reason this is going to go with 0, and then it's going to go with 0.8, 0.5, 0.3 randomly, and that just doesn't work for our situation. So we're going to get character sprite list dot size -1. We're rounding this between the rand range of 0 and character sprite list. So if we have a character sprite list of 0 and 1, then it will jump between a random range of 0 and 1 when the game starts. If we play this now, you'll notice that the enemies have a little bit more character to them. And every time we jump back into it, the players, or the enemies, are going to look different. Okay. Go back to the scripts, enemy script, and we're going to check if the enemy is still alive or not. So if alive was true, play the normal sprite list. If the enemy is not, we're going to check if temp death state Then what we're going to do is we can just copy these. Yeah. We'll paste that down here. We'll remove the variable because we already have it defined. And then set the temp death state equals false. Since this is running in the process function, I wanted to give it a true or false statement so we could exit out of it, else it'd be setting the current sprite and all this into frame 1 or frame 0, and it just wouldn't work properly. And then what we're going to do is we are going to change this sprite to explosion. Now we're going to go down to our animate function. Then we're going to go down here to where we have current sprite equals 0. We're going to check if alive and move current sprite over, else. So if the enemy is now not alive, we're going to get if get parent dot get child count is greater than 2. Then we're going to change this over to a scene. So we're going to change this to the game over. We can copy and paste that up here. And finally, we can queue free. Then the next thing we need to do is jump back into the laser script, then navigate back to where we had the area.getParent.queueFree. Instead of queueFree, we'll comment this back out, and dot alive equals false, and area dot get parent dot temp death state equals true. Now if we go back to our main level and if we play the game and we miss, it will play the game over once we destroy one enemy. So in order to fix this, we're going to change in the enemy script, if getParent getChild count is less than 2. Now if we play the game, it will go back to the game over screen whenever all the enemies have been removed. And that's it for this tutorial. In the next video, we'll be handling how to spawn the enemies using tile map positions. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.